I'm Landon Darrence. I am the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center out of Washington, D.C. Really excited to have a conversation today about a mission impossible, decarbonization of the industrial sector for a net zero future. As Gail is demonstrating, we need a little bit of help on the headsets. So this is a silent disco. If you don't have one, you can't hear me. It's because you don't have a headset on. So please put one on. We're going to get going in a broader dialogue here. Closing out week one of the COP29 here in Baku. We've had Finance Day. We've had Energy Day. We've been thinking about the challenges of broader decarbonization. And really excited to talk about a topic that perhaps doesn't get as much attention as other aspects of it. The transportation sector, power side and electricity and the renewables deployment globally, obviously a lot of attention. But 1/3 of the emissions challenge does come from heavy industry and the hard debate sectors. And so this is a conversation about those topics today. And to make this happen, we're really excited to have an esteemed group of panelists to dig into the issues. It's my pleasure from my left all the way down the chain here to introduce Gail Schuler, Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of 3M. Thomas Burr, Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer of E.ON. Ivana Yemelkova, did I do all right? Chief Executive Officer of the Hydrogen Council. I'm really bad at last names. I can do the first names all day long. And then Roger Martella, who's Group Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at GE Vernova. Welcome all. Really excited to dig into this topic, which I think does maybe get a little bit under-prioritized compared to some other issues, but we're going to bring some depth to it today. To kick off that conversation, I really want to frame the problem set, and I want to start with you, Gail, just to think about how what does it mean to decarbonize the hard debate sectors? Of course, barriers. I like to look at barriers and also in the context of opportunities. I think that you can't just look at this as a problem. You have to look at the upside as well. And so, how are industrial companies looking to address Scope 1? And, how does this have a temporal element? What's the near-term challenges versus the long-term?
Thanks for bringing us up and recognizing, we are moving so far with the transportation industry. Some of the conventional hard debate sectors, we think about steel, we think about cement and concrete, we think about, many of the energy areas, but the mainstream industrial base that many of us work with as a global manufacturer, for an example, is an area that maybe we haven't talked about as much, and it has an important footprint and an important opportunity. Many of us have moved quite far on the Scope 2 piece, the renewable electricity, and really proud of that and excited about the progress we've made. But we still have high temperature manufacturing processes, under 1,000 degrees maybe, but hundreds of degrees where it isn't conventionally working. So it's much more difficult to move. And that's an area that we are continuing to focus on.
So looking at that from a near-term aspect, how do you address the near-term emissions profile versus where 3M wants to be over a much longer horizon?
Oh, I love that you asked this question. We're really, we're scientists by nature. We're a material science company, very mathematics and analytical. So anytime we set a goal or put our feet forward on these things, we make sure we have the math and the path to get there. So we identify what specific programs, what specific technologies, when we can do it, how much it's going to cost, and what the payback is over time. And so as we do that, there are things like I mentioned with the renewables that we're doing that. We look across our portfolio. Where is the heavy footprint of our portfolio? What does that mean in terms of certain processes? So we're really going, to a large extent, site by site, process by process, to prioritize and make the changes.
I'm going to go all the way to the far end to bring in Roger on this too, because I think, I've visited some of your facilities. I've seen what you've done around COPs previously, thinking about the need to continue to innovate, and these are long and short-term solutions. So, Roger, can you build out the near-term challenges and then how GE Vernova is approaching decarbonization and hard to abate over the horizon as well?
Landon, thank you very much, and thanks for including us, GE Vernova, and me in this discussion. So when we think of our role in addressing the hard-to-abate sectors, We are the provider of electricity equipment. Our equipment helps produce 25% of the world's energy, very diverse portfolio from gas to nuclear to renewables to electrification grid equipment. So what we have to do is get the grid ready for GAL and 3M and all of our colleagues so that they can decarbonize the transportation sector by joining the grid. It's something that we do, but at the same time, it's a challenging opportunity because we're seeing so much demand for electrification from so many different reasons. So we have to really make sure we're acting with urgency, we're being smart, and that we're being fast. So we have and we have to make that energy lower in intensity when it comes to carbon so that GAIL can meet her greenhouse gas goals and things like that. So what we're doing is we're focused on electrification and decarbonization together to want to join the grid and decarbonize by electrifying. So when it comes to electrification, about increasing capacity. Is it?
You're good. Keep going. Keep trying.
Okay. Should I use a different microphone? It's about, I think. That's fine. Is this better? Yeah. Okay.
Better.
Thank you. When it comes to electrification, it's about increasing capacity as quickly as we can. We're expanding our factories, we're expanding our workforces, we're growing our supply chain globally in all of our businesses, power, renewable, and grid equipment because of the demand that's coming so fast. But as we do that, we have to lower the carbon intensity of the capacity we're putting on the grid. So by one example, in 2023, we added 29 gigawatts of capacity across power, renewables. We energized 64 gigawatts of grid equipment to make the grid stronger. That's about the size of Thailand. But our carbon intensity from that portfolio was 25% lower than the carbon intensity of the grid as a whole. So we're improving the trajectory of climate change so those who join the grid are doing it with cleaner electrons. So that's how we think about the role we play, really critical, so that others can join the grid, decarbonize that way. But we're just at the early days of this. This is, the rest of this decade into the future as more sectors have to sign up for the grid.
Okay, Thomas, hold Roger accountable here because he's talking a lot about the grid, and I think E.ON being a multinational utility, you're dealing with this in a very different lens, although it's complementary. GE Vernova's putting energy onto the grid. You're managing that whole system. What does it mean for your customer base and for E.ON to be able to manage the decarbonization challenge?
So, we are, I love to hear that we are multinational. Actually, we are a pan-European company. We are, our operations are on the European continent. And this is a market with a steep growth of renewables. So the secret sauce of decarbonization is electrification. And electrification will not work without digitizing the grid end to end. We have roughly 4,000 commercial industrial sites all over Europe. And a typical customer of E.ON is a company, let's say a mid-size energy-intensive consumer with electricity or energy value content in its product of something between 2 or 5%. And most of them in a mid-temperature segment. Why I'm telling that, what we honestly have to admit is we have solutions for many, but we don't have solutions for all, and I come to that in a second. So there are a lot of solutions available for electrifying industrial heat already, but that needs to employ ruthless innovation, right? We're looking into heater concepts, into heat batteries. We are looking into state-of-the-art heat pumps just to electrify customers and get them away from fossil energy sources for heat. There are many customers who are not ready to leave molecules, who are not ready to go into electrons. So all the high temperature chemistry, which is steel, for example, a lot of chemical processes which are, let's say, beyond north of 1,000 degrees in their processes, in their steam production, or which use fossils as a raw product, for steel making or so. It's getting really slim with solutions. I mean, and I guess hydrogen is coming into play. In my point of view, it does not need to be necessarily green hydrogen in the first place. We are a little bit too religious on that one in Europe, so we should think about alternatives like blue hydrogen or start the hydrogen economy at all in the first place before we stretch our brains too much how green it should be. But there are customer groups where direct electrification, which is by far the most efficient way to decarbonize, is not yet possible. And there we have to be very creative with molecule solutions, I guess.
You're teeing up a pretty an easy conversation here on hydrogen as well, which I want to pivot to since we have an expert. Can I ask one follow-up question of you? Both Gail and Roger talked about a temporal element, about the near-term and long-term aspects of this. Obviously, one component of the grid right now that takes up a lot of airtime is this conversation around supercomputing and AI. Yeah. Is that going to fatigue our ability to be able to address decarbonization of other sectors? Can we do this in parallel? What's your feeling in terms of that?
So we have a lot of conversations with operators of data centers. There is a real boom time now. People want to go into the hotspot areas. So when we talk with data center operators, their first choice is we want to go to Amsterdam, we want to go to Paris, we want to go to Frankfurt, where very little grid capacity is available. And regardless how much we ramp up our investment promise for the next years, it's a question of availability of material and of people. So we have to embark on a conversation which says, reconsider your location concept. Yeah? There are places where you have enough grid and where you have enough renewables for operations. And maybe if it's not the most optimal point for internet connection, let's have an educated discussion about what is the problem easier to solve. So instead of going to Frankfurt, if I take Germany as an example, consider going to areas like Hanover or Hamburg, where you still have far better site conditions from a grid perspective. That is the discussion we have to run. Instead of we want to build a data center, no matter of the cost, I want it now, which is simply technical, not possible in some of the areas. A very quick word. What we also regarding data centers, we consider data centers as electrical heaters with data services as a byproduct. So it's a huge chance also for energy transformation using the heat of data centers. And so it's for us a big part to the solution, much rather than part of the problem as grid operators.
Fascinating. Roger, I told you this would be conversational, and there was a two-finger down there in the end, but I do want to bring in Ivana in a second. Go ahead. No, go ahead and jump in, but we'll keep it quick.
I'll be very fast, Landon, but just on the data center concept, as a global company, we certainly see the demand from data centers, but as I mentioned, we're seeing the demand from many factors all around the world, whether energy security, manufacturing, just the need for more power, the doubling of demand. And Landon, to your question, we see this as an opportunity. We're decades overdue for this type of investment in electricity infrastructure. We need it for electrification, but as we invest in this infrastructure, every dollar we spend on electrification is basically a dollar we're spending on decarbonization, because we're putting cleaner electrons on the grid, we're bringing down the carbon intensity. So data centers is one of many factors, but I think while it's driving demand for electricity, as are many other reasons, it's helping us with the decarbonization goals at the same time. And we have pathways, we can talk about it if you want, on how you incorporate SMRs and renewables and carbon capture into data centers as well.
All right, but before we do that, we're going to go to Ivana to have a conversation about different technology sets, and that specifically talking about how the world is thinking about hydrogen in the context of decarbonization, because I think it's important to talk about these specific solution options that we have to address industrial decarb.
Really wonderful to be here.
Let's get the other mic.
There we go. Thank you. Really fantastic to be here with you all, and I'm really enjoying the COP spirit of this conversation, sharing equipment, teeing up each other's questions. You're wonderful. So I represent an organization, a global CEO coalition that brings together some 140 businesses and investors who are working together to accelerate hydrogen. Some of our members in the room, so really appreciate seeing you. And the value proposition of hydrogen as it relates to hard to abate sectors is very easy. We turn them from hard to abate to possible to abate. And I think that is really in a nutshell what hydrogen is all about. Now, I did not say easy to abate. I did not say cheap to abate. It's still a lot of work, but we have the solutions that can provide, that can address those high-grade heat situations, the long duration, the long-range situations where electrons at this point in time do not necessarily provide that solution. Now, we love electrons. We depend on them. That's how you make hydrogen, right? So again, I want to be really clear that hydrogen is here to complement other technologies. Hydrogen is not a silver bullet. It is really a solution that will allow us to complete the energy transition and address the sectors that otherwise would be out of reach. And I want to add one more point. Thomas, you teed it up so beautifully. These different colors of hydrogen, what is it all about, right? So we use the rainbow spectrum sometimes as a useful shorthand for different production methods. Hydrogen can be produced effectively from any primary energy source. And based on that, some people say, if you use nuclear, it's sort of pink. If you use renewables, it's green. If you use natural gas with CCS, it's blue. It's a very confusing conversation that does not really allow us to account for the carbon intensity. So our mantra on the Hydrogen Council has been, forget the colors. It's really all about carbon intensity, emissions intensity. Let's make sure we have a framework that allows us all to speak with the same language and allows us to define, measure, verify, and certify the climate attributes of our molecules. And then we're in the game. Then we can start, flowing, trading, valuing the benefit that we see from clean molecules.
And I think that passion for hydrogen has been pretty pervasive throughout the conversations on industrial decarb for some time. It's going through some vacillations, hydrogen as a solution set, and certainly I've seen that in Washington, D.C. in the context of policy. We've seen the Inflation Reduction Act put a lot of momentum behind the idea of 45V, sponsoring a whole new hydrogen industry. And that's been fatigued a little bit about how people are approaching the specificity in which we realize those ambitions. Can you push back on me? Am I wrong on this? Like, what's the story?
Look, Landon, you're absolutely right in that we humankind are a very impatient species. We make an announcement in 2002, 2022, 23, 24, and we think that within 18 months it's all done, right? We will have transformed the entire energy system. Now, that's not how it works. So let me give you a super quick 30-second history class here in hydrogen. Hydrogen Council was started in 2017. Around the 2020, 21, 22 COVID times, remember, many countries came forward with national strategies for hydrogen. We're in 2024. Most countries are only just translating these strategies into actual policies and regulations, and that's exactly where we are. And I will offer two numbers to give you a sense where we are in hydrogen and how far we have come. The first number is $75 billion. In just the last 4 years, committed capital to hydrogen has grown 7 times. It used to take us a decade to get to 1 billion, and we are now seeing that trajectory. So 75 billion committed to hydrogen projects, 434 hydrogen projects around the world passed final investment decision. So we're no longer talking PowerPoints, press releases, MOUs, that passion that this is a fantastic idea. We're talking about how we make it happen. And honestly, that can be tiring. The day-to-day of that can be really tough. You don't get to cut as many ribbons. You have to write a lot of papers. So I appreciate that, the process of policy making can be tedious, but we need to keep going because we can see when we look at the deployment around the world that policy drives business in this case. So we really see the likes of IRA 45Q moving projects past the FID line. We see that hesitation, right? Rules missing 3 years on. How is that even possible? Who would put money on the table? We really calculated 13 billion of projects waiting in feet in the US, renewable hydrogen, and not moving to FID because of that uncertainty on 45E. Imagine how we could unlock that. We could do that, right? It's in our power. We write those rules. So, no, I would really say let's be patient, let's be bullish on what needs to be accomplished, but let's also understand and appreciate that it takes some time to unfold.
Okay, so patience on the technology deployment, bullishness on the ambition to make sure it happens. Okay, I'm following this. Thomas, you wanted to jump in really quick with a two-finger there.
Very quickly, I mean, the perception of the hydrogen journey in European industry followed the typical excitement and frustration curve. the excitement was, hey, hydrogen cannot be so much different from gas industry, natural gas industry. All the rules for transport, for trade, more or less apply to hydrogen, which was an absolute mistake in my point of view. It's a completely different ball game. First thing, and second thing, and that initiated the curve of frustration, was the view that if you look into history, energy-heavy industry always came close to the baseload producers in Europe, close to nuclear, close to coal. And if this logic applies for hydrogen as well, it makes people very reflective and also anxious that the hydrogen economy will drag out the industry out of Europe to the places where hydrogen can be made at competitive conditions, and that is the sunny belt of this planet, and that really initiated a kind of doom view onto hydrogen in Europe, right?
Oh, Yael, you want to jump in?
I'll go ahead and balance on that just a little bit, not to dispute any of the points that are made. I think that one of the things we need to recognize with our electric grid or our natural gas grid or across the board is there are always geographic preferences. There are always places where it makes more sense for one than another. And when we think about a broad brush doing every answer, it's probably not going to work that way. One of the things I love most about attending COP is seeing how the conversations change over years. And it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about renewable, whether it's wind or solar, whether that was viable, whether it was cost effective, whether it could scale. And we've come up that technology S-curve on this. And it appears from what I'm seeing, and actually what I've been hearing here in Azerbaijan about the appetite for hydrogen and the challenges of bringing in wind turbines with, canals being closed because of conflicts. There can be different opportunities and different solutions. So I think it's coming up the curve is my view.
I'm going to stick with you, Gail. I think part of the conversation here, though, too, is there's obviously an urgency. Looking back in Dubai, we know that we're not meeting the benchmarks of lowering emissions at a pace in which people are comfortable with, that we need to keep 1.5 alive. That puts a lot of pressure on people to act at a pace and scale of a pretty unprecedented nature. If you look at conventional energy resources, the first natural gas export facilities, LNG facilities in the 70s, right? And that didn't become a really globally traded commodity market until the last decade. So what other technologies should we be looking at? Because if there's a diversity, I want to hear about them, and I want to hear how 3M's thinking about it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you about things I know about, but I'm sure there's others in the room
Roger will
around
have
here.
opinions about
Roger
this
will
too.
know more. Awesome. Okay. Well, I think you're right. It's a great progress from a carbon and many perspectives to move from coal to natural gas. But that doesn't take us all the way there, obviously. So, when we look at some of the infrastructure that we put in place in our manufacturing sites, some of the pieces of equipment, whether it's, we're going to talk about really sexy technologies here, but whether it's the heating and cooling systems or it's natural gas boilers or things like this, we maintain them well and they last for decades, sometimes 5 or 6 decades. So decisions that are being made now dramatically affect our ability to meet our carbon neutrality goals for 2050. So some of the things that we're looking at are switching from natural gas to biofuels instead. And that has to become more part of our equation now. Our intention is that the last resort for us will be purchasing offsets or things like that. But between now and then, there's many steps along the way. And so, we're looking at, advancing those natural gas boilers and other manufacturing processes with alternative fuels. We're looking at how we make the processes using electricity and how we do more. So I think there's a lot of steps to go.
Well, and I like Thomas's point earlier that some of this technology has dual purpose, and so when you see a problem set of the data centers being, wow, this is going to really be a demand signal that maybe we weren't anticipating, but thinking about the heat, I mean, that's the kind of creative solutions you're talking about.
Absolutely, because we do that in our own manufacturing sites, as we use the heat that's generated from a process then to help run a different one. And doing that at scale with data centers, I actually haven't heard anyone talking about that before, so I love that, and I'm glad that people are thinking about it.
Roger, Ivana gave us a lot of motivation for green hydrogen. Makes me excited about that, but I know that there's a depth of technologies that we can talk about, and I want to see if you can't bring some other aspects of what's out there into the equation.
Sure, Landon, and one of the things I love about this conversation is that we're having it. I mean, it wasn't long ago people were trying to pick winners and losers in technologies, and I think one of the themes that's coming through is it really needs to be all of the above. I think the world's come around to that, and we can be all of the above, we can electrify, and we can have decarbonization. So our view of the world is, what are the technologies we have available right now? There's this electrification imperative. We've got to meet the demand. If we don't, somebody else will, and the world needs energy. So for this decade, of course, we see gas playing a critical role for that dispatchable 24/7 power. Nuclear, where appropriate with policies around the world, there's been a resurgence of nuclear, and some countries are growing that out more aggressively than others, but we completely align to that. Grow renewables as quickly as possible. There's limitations, on how much you can integrate them. Probably this decade, every year gets more and more, including for data centers, and really invest in the grid. I think one of the other great developments the last 12 months is the grid has finally gotten the reputation it's deserved in Europe, in the US, and everybody sees this as a real energy security issue, a national security issue. We have to be spending $1 on the grid when we're spending $1 on generation. So that's for this decade, and that solves for electrification. It brings down carbon intensity along the way, improves the trajectory of climate change emissions. But it doesn't necessarily get you to the net zero 2050. If you're to plop it out, it's not going to line up. So what we have to be thinking about, what are the breakthrough technologies for the next decade? What are we working on in our research centers today? Hydrogen, of course, and seeing hydrogen as an ability, our turbines will be capable of running 100% on hydrogen by the end of this decade. They're already running on hydrogen now, but we want to get them 100% ready. Carbon capture and sequestration, another technology that wasn't really something a lot of people wanted to talk about because it implied there was going to be a lot of fossil fuels going on, but now it's back in the mainstream. Completely supportive of that. We move more air through our turbines than any other technology in the world. If we can solve for carbon capture, everyone else is going to solve for carbon capture, so we're invested there. And then of course, small modular nuclear reactors. You can't talk about data centers without talking about SMRs. We have the leading technology there, the BWRX. It'll be the first to be commercialized later this decade, around 2029. But there's lots of other great technologies out there too. And so I think that's how we see it, as gas, incorporate renewables, bring SMRs online, and then start to decarbonize the gas through hydrogen and carbon capture. There's other things out there like battery storage and so on. We're not the experts in that necessarily, but certainly other technologies that can complement that, but that's our roadmap.
It's interesting you refer to these as breakthrough technologies, because I think a lot of times this is about scaling these technologies. Yeah. We know them. It's about bringing them to market. Gail, I don't know, do you think of hydrogen as a breakthrough, or do you think about this as really the mechanics of financing it in the policy spectrum to make sure it's a reality? Oh, sorry, I meant Ivana.
No worries. This one, oh yeah, it's working. We're a team, so all good. Look, I definitely think about it as a scale problem and as a value chain problem. So let me go 2 steps back. First, I really am loving this conversation because it is practical and it is inclusive, and we are realizing that we need every decarbonized electron and every decarbonized molecule to make this happen. This is not about picking winners and losers. We will all lose if we do not get this done. Now, the scale problem. Hydrogen as a technology is mature. But what we need to get is that operational experience, right? That operational experience at scale. And we are starting to see that. I mentioned the number of projects that are being rolled out. I mean, every week there is some sort of launch of something. Someone is building something, opening something, expanding something, installing electrolyzers. And we really need to see the volume so that we can learn how to optimize, how to make it even more efficient, cost effective, and get the snowball rolling. So for me, it's a scale. And the second point I wanted to mention, it's a value chain issue as well. Now, hydrogen is somewhat more complex to deploy than, say, renewables. You cannot just go and do a project, use a PPA and be done. You really need to line up the production with the offtake, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So this is the big issue we're trying to solve even at this COP. How do we make sure that there is enough stability, predictability, and that long-term sort of incentive in place so that people can start investing, they can start managing risk. It is not unique to hydrogen. Every single technology has to go through this sort of special, vulnerable, but absolutely pivotal phase. And this is where we are in hydrogen right now. I look around the world. North America leading. 90% of the world's projects pass FID in low carbon hydrogen. China leading 65% of electrolyzer capacity in China right now. Europe leading in terms of announcements, but perhaps not as much trickling into execution because we tried to be perfect in our regulation instead of focusing on progress. Double-digit growth numbers in Asia-Pac. Double-digit growth numbers. Why? Because they need every single electron, they need every single molecule, and they know it. So very uneven progress, but I am excited about the dynamic. And when I speak to some of our members who are, for example, in the electrolyzer business, they tell me, look, I'm at this scale right now, this is where I will get 2060, this is where I will get 28, and this is where the efficiencies will really kick in. So we're at that point in that journey.
And Thomas, do you see the innovation and scaling exercise from a similar lens coming out at the utility side? And also, how do the consumers actually factor into how you drive this as well?
Yeah, so in my point of view, it's spot on. I would even go a step further, irrespective of the learning curve where each kind of technology is at the moment. If we want to go net zero in 2050, we have to live and we have to deal with the technologies which are available today. There is no silver bullet on our way to 2050 which changes the landscape dramatically. All the technologies we have, it's hydrogen, it's CCS, it's geothermal, for example, and also small, medium nuclear reactors, fusion technologies, they all need their learning curve, yeah, and they can use it. We have to be careful a little bit in barking the wrong tree when we talk about these technologies. The cheapest technology in new build schemes for generating energy is a combination out of wind plus solar plus batteries plus low carbon peakers, full stop. And that is beating everything. That is beating gas turbines, that is beating for sure coal and of course nuclear. So if we talk about nuclear, and I'm a very non-German point of view, I'm not worried about safety, I'm not worried about waste, I'm just worried about the cost. If we start building new nuclear reactors in Europe, for example, we will see after approval period of 5 years, building time of 10 years with to be expected overflow of cost. We will see baseload generating technology at the end of the 30s, at the beginning of the 40s, hitting a world of 80-90% of renewables. So what do you want with a big power station which generates baseload at very, very high capex costs? Yeah? So we have to be selective on the one hand, but we have to be super, super open to all technologies.
Roger.
And not kill them with regulation. Sorry.
Did you want to jump in again?
No, I thought Roger. Roger might have something to say.
Yeah, Roger, I want to have a little bit of a debate on this then. Okay. Obviously, you just mentioned you're going to be deploying the SMR in Ontario by about 2029. What's the impetus for small modular reactors as a solution set on this? And how does energy security a component of that dialogue?
I'd say there's a number of impetuses. I think first of all, there's the impetus for having a long-term dispatchable 24/7 solution, which is without emissions, which is nuclear. And small modular reactors are the future of that. There's the ability to deploy SMRs much quicker and much more rapid than we've done historically with conventional nuclear. You can pair them up to industrial applications, you can pair them up to data centers. They just become much more adaptable. In that way, you can do them behind the grid, which solves some permitting issues in a lot of places in the world, solves some internet connection queues. And if I'm being completely transparent, there's a competitiveness issue to it too. If the United States doesn't become the leader in SMRs, someone else is going to become the leaders in SMRs. A lot of this technology is effectively the space race of our generation. It's not just SMRs, it's hydrogen, it's carbon capture, it's all of this. And so there's a real national security element to a lot of the things we're talking about. Energy is prosperity. We have to be addressing climate change at the same time, and whoever can do both of those the best is going to have a global competitiveness issue. And we're seeing that in the European Union, we're seeing the UK make that one of their top priorities. I think it's going to be a top 2 priority for the Trump administration, certainly a priority for China, and I think for a lot of our very diverse audience here, a theme through COP. So SMRs play into that innovation, technology, competitiveness narrative as well.
Yeah, I think I visited Brussels in February, and the farmers were having protests, and it was a measure of competitiveness. And Thomas, just to go back to your point, I'm curious if you can build on it one more time, which is, The aspect of the consumer, emphasis on costs. I really think that the competitiveness conversation is one of industry, of jobs and manufacturing, but it's also obviously being impacted by the broad electorate too in Europe.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we just saw it in the US that the main topic which changes the political landscape and decided the elections was jobs and economy in the first place. As we hear from our friends in the US, it's the economy, stupid, right? And we are very close that something similar also happens in Europe, and that if that happened, it would slow down our decarbonization journey severely. And so we have to deal with the challenges which is coming from the affordability problem, right? If we are not able to sell the energy transformation as a positive story, and we can convince the people to say there is something in for them, it's not jeopardizing your workplaces, and it's not bringing all our economy at risk, we will lose on this path. So we are really forced to come up with competitive solutions, and that brings me back to nuclear. So from a technical standpoint, I'm 100% with you. But what I hear from our customers all over Europe, they cannot discuss about power prices fairly north of 100 euro per megawatt hour. And I don't see any chance that a nuclear reactor of any size in the future new build will match this number. So in my perception, there is a very specific group of customers who pay any price for power today. That is the digital industry at the moment. So let the small, medium reactors come. In my point of view, they will serve a niche at the end of the day. They will not change the whole landscape.
This sounds like we have a 2.0 conversation on the horizon, and I offered the Atlantic Council as a platform for digging into this and going into a deep dive. But Gail, I want to come back to you.
I don't want to be misunderstood. So my point was not we have to leave our net zero targets. I guess we need a more educated view on what we can afford, what is the right sequence, what is the right order of measures. I would not give up a single millimeter of the end goal. Right?
Sure. No, and I'm not trivializing the point. I think that this is exactly the kind of conversation we need to have on the technologies, because there is an urgency for that level of deployment. But Gail, bringing the conversation back to the broader decarbonization and industry thematic of why this audience came to us in the UN Pavilion today, you probably provided the best texture on broadening the scope away from just heavy industry, because there's a lot of applications that 3M's dealing with in the decarbonization space. Can you bring a little bit more thought behind how 3M is thinking about those other aspects of decarbonization?
Yeah, we talk about it now as decarbonization or climate tech or clean tech. Some time ago, it was just energy efficiency. It was about building your buildings to be efficient. It was about good business practice, not to waste money. And so, we have a long history of things like window films and things like, cables and connectors and so on for electrical infrastructure. Over time, we're realizing that it's a much bigger market. So we've moved more into material science solutions that help enable the electric vehicle transportation, help enable new things in aerospace and other areas. But increasingly, we're looking at what is the bigger picture, because anytime there's this type of disruption, there are some really important things that happen. One is what we have almost touched on, but I think we need to, on STEM and STEM education and making sure that we have people ready to work in this workforce. So that's a really important piece to bring along. But the other is there's going to be a business opportunity associated with this. So we know, for example, with hydrogen that we have materials that are working well in pilots and scales as we start to ramp up for things that help with electrolyzers, that help with the the films required, the transportation, and so on, glass beads to help transport at the right temperatures. We know that when it comes to small module nuclear or to carbon capture, that again, they're key material solutions that are going to be really important on this. I do think one of the other pieces is going to be the standardization on this, because we're familiar with scope 1, 2, and 3. How do we make sure that, when we're measuring a carbon footprint, I would really like to avoid those offsets later on and maybe get some credit for materials that are pulling carbon out of the air is one idea. So anyway, there's a lot of, I would challenge each of us. I think that our worlds are changing in the coming decades with this decarbonization, and think of it both in terms of the challenge, of course, but also what it's going to mean as an opportunity for the businesses.
Can you speak to any, and maybe foreshadow some of the areas in which 3M would be bringing some pilots or technologies to match that demand?
Well, we're a material science company at our core. We have we have many. I've talked a little bit about some of the materials that would go into a hydrogen or a small module nuclear reactor, about kind of that surface energy effect. You know us for N95 respirators. It's all about having surfaces that can interact with things. Well, that's really important in all of these technologies that we've talked about. I think some other important areas would be, as Roger was talking about, the importance of grid and having a grid that's resilient and a grid that is safe, where you can avoid disruption. We have new technologies that are coming into this space that can sense when there's a disruption starting in the grid, and therefore help the operator know where to make a change before it really ends up hitting as a bigger issue, and it can be a security element as well.
I definitely think that we can look at that being a growing portion of the dialogue in Washington, D.C., and frankly, the transatlantic partnership, as we're trying to see where supply chains have vulnerabilities vis-a-vis China and broader security imperatives. I do want to seize on in Gail's point about STEM, and I'm curious, and I think this is a question for everybody. Maybe, Roger, I'll start with you, and we can go down the line. What is the human capital element of this, and making sure that we have the education and the background to achieve industrial decarbonization? What do we need to put behind it? Is that human capital there, and how do we build it out if it's not?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like we're solving for a new set of problems. I think these are good problems to solve for: supply chain, permitting, human capital. Like, thankfully, we're solving for this at this point and debating about whether we should be doing it. And we start with this with like a unapologetically optimistic message that this is like a once-in-a-century opportunity for people to be part of a solution. And Landon, you and I have had this conversation. I worry a bit that, I look at my own children, right? And this is a depressing topic to them, literally. I'm not exaggerating. And I worry that's a little bit of the message that most people see. It's the concern. It's a serious concern, right? And that's why we're all here having this discussion. But we try to send a more hopeful message that there are technologies, there's policies, there's businesses that can set you up to solve for this. So we start with a philosophy before we kind of get into the details of how you do it. Just trying to be a little more aspirational, a little more optimistic. How can, while I'm not going to solve this probably on my watch, I can hopefully set the table so that the next generation can come in and really spend their career executing, implementing it. And so for a company like GE Vernova, which plays this unique role in the electrification, decarbonization space, this sense of purpose, you have to start with the sense of purpose, because that is what really drives, I think, people to sign up for companies, where they want to work, what gets them up in the morning, and really driving factors. So you go from there, and what we're trying to do is move beyond the model where we just make something in the US and ship it around the world. Anywhere we work in more than 100 countries, we have an obligation to bring them into the supply chain and to bring them into the workforce. And so Sandra, who's sitting in front of me here, she leads our global government affairs team from Dubai. When she goes around the world, we connect STEM events with her to make sure that we're reaching underserved populations, people who may not even have had access to STEM careers. So Sandra will focus on STEM opportunities for all women, or maybe in communities that aren't even aware of the STEM opportunities. We do the equivalent in the US through all kinds of chains. But absolutely, we're not there today, but I'm going to be really optimistic on this, because I'm seeing the enthusiasm. If we start with that sense of purpose, the motivation is going to come. Every school's adding programs here. I'm not worried about MIT. I'm not worried about Stanford and Columbia and Princeton. I'm worried about where Sandra goes, and that's where we've actually set this as one of our sustainability goals, being accountable for developing the next generation of workforce in underserved communities and make sure that they're part of the economic development and benefits that's inevitably going to come with this.
Ivana, please jump in. I've never heard a conversation around how the hydrogen sector is driving the need for this kind of human capital.
So it's a really interesting one, and Gail and I attended a great session this morning where we talked specifically about gender and building a more inclusive, diverse kind of space, because you're spot on, Roger. These are different types of problems. They have not necessarily been at the center of the conversation before. So we need people from different walks of life, and that's a great opportunity. It's no longer the traditional profiles, the traditional CVs. I mean, we need people who are creative, who are problem solvers, who come in and combine their specific expertise and knowledge in this wonderful, wonderful melting pot. With your permission, I wanted to pick up on two topics that you mentioned, Roger. One is that inclusive lens. Obviously, we are here hosted very graciously by the Atlantic Council, so that is our focus. But if we do get the energy transition right, it will create amazing opportunities for people in other parts of the world. And I think that's really critical. Emerging markets, developing economies. If you can leverage the primary energy resources you have in your country in an entirely new way, you can create new industries. You can create prosperity for people who have not had those opportunities in the past. And I think that's critically important. And we should not, we tend to focus on our markets because we know them best. But I think that is a story that needs to be told time and time again. And I will finish on hopefully a high note. Roger, your point on, passing on that more optimistic message. I get to spend a lot of time on the road, as you can imagine, and whenever I have a quiet moment between connections, I read. A fantastic book I read a few weeks ago, Hannah Ritchie, Not the End of the World. If you have not had the chance to get your hands on it, please buy this Christmas present for everybody you know and everybody who works in climate and clean energy. Why? She's a data scientist, and she basically uses giant data sets to put a different perspective on some of these big issues. There's a whole chapter on, we sometimes feel so desperate, right? So pessimistic about our ability to solve some of these issues, right? We attend a few COP sessions and we're like, how do we ever achieve consensus on this 30-page paper? And how will we actually translate this 30-page paper into some sort of action? She reminds us, and I think this is really important, that we as humankind have solved these issues before. Across a range of issues, we have halved children mortality, we have made vaccines available, we have, in the climate space or in the environment space, we have solved the ozone layer problem. Acid rains, is that an issue anymore, right? It was a massive issue at the time. So how did we do that? Number one, and a powerful reminder that we can. It is within our ability. We just have to choose to do that.
Okay, this is hopeful, but it doesn't necessarily translate yet to knowing if we have the labor force and the capacities to make it happen. And Thomas, jump in on the STEM question for the utility sector too. It's on.
First and foremost, I share your optimism. Yeah, I'm super relaxed regarding the future, but what we see today is that access to talent, access to labor is already a constraining factor in the European economy in Europe. And it is progressively getting a factor in competitiveness. Yeah? Some of these problems are homemade in Europe, yeah? And there are solutions which we have to tackle far more consequently. So for example, the ability to integrate the strong flow of immigrants into the labor market and not only in the social systems. Yeah, that is one factor. That's a typical European disease, how to manage that. And the second is the far more consequent usage of AI and emerging technologies to overcome the lack of skilled labor. We cannot compete on, let's say, outflow of graduates out of the university against China, and maybe not even against the US. We have a competitive disadvantage here as Europeans, which we cannot overcome that quickly. But we have instruments which we have to take a little bit more rigorously, a little bit more consequently, to at least catch up on this in this competition. Right?
All right, Gail, you were energized there. Jump on in.
I was. I actually don't think that, beg forgiveness, Thomas, I don't think of this as a competition. I think that we have plenty of challenges to solve. With the business field, yes, we will be competing, don't get me wrong. But in terms of educating the global workforce, inspiring the global workforce to work on things, I'm going to catch up on Hannah's book. This sounds like excellent reading. I don't know if okay, excellent. I don't know if my whole family wants to receive copies. Maybe we'll share it online. But I do think that helping people with the understanding, fundamentally, we have moved so far and solved so many things over time. We could spend all day if we chose to talking about that. We will get past this, but we'll get past it faster and more collectively. When we were here at COP, we're looking at all the countries of the world. If more people are educated in science, technology, engineering, and math, more people with more different perspectives that are going to really, we've seen it time and time again, are going to create the breakthroughs that it is required to make this happen and make it happen faster in ways that aren't anticipated. And you know, AI has to be a piece of that. We want it to be a piece of it, but we need to find the ways to really bring people up. So it's exciting.
We've covered a lot of ground, and we're getting close to time. And you know, from technology to cost to capacity, there's a broad range of topics we covered. I want to bring this back to policy and about the near term. What is, and I'm the same question to all of you. What is going right? What do we need to keep pressing on and make change on today, right away? Thomas?
Yeah, so I have to distinguish a little bit about very specific problems or challenges in our area of competition, geographic area, and the rest of the world. So I have some wishes to regulators and policymakers. First of all, embrace innovation and technology far more as we do it today. Leave the ability for the private sector to attract private money. And I leave it to you how much this is a global problem or, let's say, a tiny, desperate European problem. But that is what worries me most at the moment.
Wonderful. Ivana?
In 30 seconds, right? So, look, I mean, this was a big COP for hydrogen. Why? Because we managed to receive a dedicated hydrogen declaration from the presidency and from all the governments, because they're really keen to continue the momentum, and that's super encouraging. In the last 5 years, we've had nearly 60 different countries around the world adopt national strategies for hydrogen, and now they're really in the thick of implementation. So my challenge is to somehow keep everybody motivated through that, you know, roll up your sleeves and write some documents type of glamorous climate work, which is where we are right now. And I would say the number one issue we need, or issue we need to solve, the number one ingredient we need is demand. In the system we have right now, we don't necessarily incentivize climate attributes of our energy solutions. So we need to override the system in a way. And if we want it to behave in a certain way, we need to put in place government incentives, mandates, targets, public procurement, purchase and public-private partnerships. So we really have to be super intentional. Like I said earlier, if we want the energy transition, we have to choose it. If we want hydrogen to help decarbonize hard to abate, we have to act like we do. And we're really in the thick of that implementation, and that will keep going. So back to the message on, you know, being bullish, staying on course, staying focused on the North Star, which is decarbonization, and working through, you know, the steps one at a time, because that's what we need to do.
Landon, I'd say very briefly, what's working is the private sector. You know, it strikes me, I'm being super optimistic this week, right? Every day's been great. I've walked out of here feeling super positive, panels like this. Then you read the news that's coming out of here, and it's like I'm in a different part of the world because the news is so depressing and negative, because there's something different happening with the private sector and the public sector. The private sector part's not getting picked up. And I think that's really important, because while there's challenges happening in other rooms, we're all committed. Like, no one's slowing down, right? Everybody's just moving faster and faster and faster. So that gives me a lot of optimism. Now, from a policy perspective, what I would say is please be a catalyst, not an inhibitor. We'll get it done. We're going to plow ahead. The only thing that can stop us is inhibiting us somehow. Permitting, bureaucracy, uncertainty. We have incentives. We like the incentives. That helps. but the uncertainty factor is the thing that puts all of this at risk. In the US and Europe, we think of permitting. There was a beautiful chart I saw you say, which different parts of the world have their different versions of permitting. Not permitting, but their own, maybe it's a finance challenge, maybe it's an infrastructure challenge, maybe it's a supply chain challenge. Every part of this world has their challenge, so the private sector needs to solve for that. But I hope the public sector looks at those charts and say, here's where we have the red. In the US, it's permitting, obviously. And here's how we're going to come up with the path and give the certainty, because the one thing that'll stop us from succeeding is a lack of certainty, frankly, uncertainty, risk, and that's going to slow us down.
All right, Gail, final word.
Okay, great comments from all the panelists. Thank you very much. And I was going very much to the same place as Roger was. I think that what has happened is governments, in many cases, especially Europe, have shown us where we need to go. This is where we want to go. And what's happened is, early on, I wouldn't say that the commercial sector was as engaged, but it clearly is now, and it's clearly building momentum, and it's going to keep going because it's good business. And so I think that's the thing to keep in mind. Where we have the challenges, I would say, is really about, we talk about sometimes is harmonizing, because if you're trying to follow one permitting rule in one country, or it's reporting rules or regulations, it's so different from country to country right now, or region to region, and that's a real challenge. So if some of that could get harmonized, it would create some real opportunities to accelerate. And we need the workforce that we need for the future.
Well, it seems to be thematically a call for consistency, a call for action, but just making sure we give the private sector an opportunity to really seize on the opportunities that these technologies and the different elements of industrial decarb have in store for us. I appreciate you all taking the time. For those in the audience, we have a little bit of a surprise feature here. No light show, no smoke popping up from the ground, but we do have one individual who's really well versed on the aspects of industrial decarbonization, and I want to invite Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International, to the podium, maybe just to provide some closing remarks and thoughts on this issue.
Happy to. Can you hear me okay? Terrific. Well, I thought this was a wonderful panel, and to give you a couple of closing thoughts. First, I heard so many themes that echo what we've been talking about all week here. I'm here both as CEO of Edison International and also the immediate past chair of the EEI, Edison Electric Institute, representing investor-owned utilities across the United States. I'm also here as a 3M board member, so very proud of that, Gail. Thank you for that. The positives. We can get there. And we've done a lot of analysis looking at our home state of California, what it will take to get the state to net zero across the economy. It's all the things you heard here. It's multiple types of generation resources across renewables, storage, nuclear, hydrogen, gas, carbon capture with sequestration. We need it all. But importantly, it's also about electrification of the economy. And this panel focused on industrial uses, which are really important. Let me give you a little soundbite over on the residential side, the consumer side, because that's important too. And one of the things that has come out of our analysis is that this transition is not just about net zero. It also has benefits for clean air. But importantly, we see economic benefits, because as end-use consumers electrify, the appliances that they pick up are more efficient than the appliances they're replacing. And so we actually see our average customer in 2045 spending a little more on electricity because they're using more, but spending 40% less in real terms on their total energy bill. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, and I think we'll see the same sort of economic benefits on the industrial side. Final comment I'll make is that one of the things I really like about COP, and this is my fifth one, it brings the parties together and it brings the private sector together. And Roger, I think you got it right. I'm excited about what the private sector is doing. We have another business called Trio that supports about 50 of the global Fortune 500 with renewable sustainability, et cetera. We are not seeing those clients change one bit in terms of their drive to move forward. So I'm confident that together we can get to net zero, but we got to get to work. Thanks so much for letting me join you, and great panel. Thank you.
Couldn't have wrapped it up better. Thank you, everybody, and thank our panelists.